Good afternoon or good morning, everyone. We've got speakers and us hosts between London and New York. But thank you very much for everyone joining in for this virtual roundtable, where we will be discussing the first ever ranking that we have released on the payment platforms that came out recently. And we're going to be discussing the results in the next hour with an amazing panel of speakers. And what I'm going to ask our speakers to do is just do a quick introduction of themselves and what they're working on. And then we'll get into the content of today's discussion. So I'll hand over. Greg, why don't you kick us off?
Sure. Thank you so much. Greg Ulrich, I'm the Chief AI and Data Officer at MasterCard. Been in the firm for a little over a decade. I joined from an acquisition of a data science company back in 2015. And before this role, most recently, I looked after strategy and M&A for the company.
Thanks, Greg. Ryan, you go next.
Yeah, hey everyone, I'm Ryan Pritchard. I'm at PayPal and I run engineering for small businesses and financial services, which cover both consumer and merchant financial services, as well as agentic commerce. And agentic commerce is what we've been spending a lot of time focusing on. Prior to that, I was CTO and led an AI startup in EdTech, and then came over here. Nice to see everyone.
Thanks so much, Ryan. And Zach, over to you.
Zach Anderson. I'm the Chief Data and Analytics Officer at JP Morgan. I've only been in the job for about 8 weeks, so I'm pretty new at JP Morgan Payments, I should say. And I was previously the CDAO at NatWest at the group level.
Thanks so much, Zach. And thank you, three, for joining us for this conversation. We're going to get into all of the details in a minute, but I also wanted to say that for everyone participating virtually, please do put questions in the chat. We're going to try and get to them. There's a lot of content that we need to get through today, but we will try and get to the questions as well. We're looking forward to a really interesting, exciting, free-flowing discussion. It is, the most exciting time to be in financial services generally, but probably payments specifically with AI, given sort of what we've been seeing over the last 3 years and moving out of testing mode and properly into deployment and execution and scaling. And so we're getting into that. But before we do that, I'm going to hand over to my great colleague, Colin Gilbert, who is going to shepherd us through this discussion. So over to you, Colin.
Thank you very much, Alexandra. So I wanted to go through a little bit of housekeeping before we jump into the primary content that we have planned today with our fellow panelists. Just to kick off, for those of you joining us that don't know, Evident is a benchmarking intelligence firm focused on the financial services industry. To that end, we do 3 things. We publish an authoritative benchmark measuring the AI maturity of the largest financial services firms, which have expanded from banking to insurance to now payments since it launched 3 years ago. We publish supporting research, insights, and data specific to each component of our methodology. And we convene senior leaders, such as those on the call today, that sit at the intersection of AI and financial services. We host a series of events throughout the year, culminating in our flagship event, the Evidence Symposium in New York in Q4. 2 weeks ago, we released the first index profiling the AI efforts of 12 of the largest payment networks and processors in the world. The key findings report that accompanies the ranking provides an overview of our approach, profiles of the current leaders, breakdowns of their performance, and a deep dive into each of the supporting pillars of our methodology. Speaking of the methodology, I want to give kind of a bird's eye view of what Evident is measuring and why. So at a high level, what Evident does is fairly simple and straightforward. We define an industry within financial services. We define a representative sample of brands or companies within that sector. And then we go out and collect thousands of data points on each of those organizations. we organize this data set into 60 scoring indicators that ladder up to the 10 sub-pillars and 4 primary pillars of assessment, which include talent, innovation, leadership, and transparency. We view these pillars as the primary enablers to accelerate AI maturity and ultimately the means to unlock progressive value from AI transformation efforts. As the name of the product implies, the index, when we get all of this data, we index each company's results against their immediate peer set to produce an overall score, which ranges from 0 to 100 points. Throughout the course of this presentation, we'll be sharing insights from each of those pillars as a jumping off point for discussion. So without further ado, I wanted to get into the raw contents of the presentation and wanted to start by talking about the ranking at a high level. So Alexandra, my first question is for you. Were you surprised at what surprised you most about the results from the payment index? And what was consistent or distinct from the other sectors that we've applied this index towards? Because if you look at the ranking from a 1 to N count, led by Visa, MasterCard, and PayPal in the top 3 slots, what you'll notice is that regardless of whether you're number 1 overall, that doesn't mean you're number 1 in each and every element of what we're ingesting into the index. So if you want to find or discover or uncover best practice, you really have to be aware of what everybody is doing in the wider ecosystem. Your thoughts?
Yeah, thank you. I'm just checking that everyone can see the ranking on the screen. But to your point, it's interesting. So when you look at we've been that everyone knows on the call. I'm assuming we got the ranking of the banks and the insurance companies, and now on the payment platforms. And some of the things that are similar for all is and what we see here in the top 3, Visa, MasterCard, and PayPal, is that this has started a long time ago, right? This is years and years of focus on building the right architecture, getting the right talent in, running this both from a top-down and a bottom-up perspective, and moving that all at once. So when you look at the performance across the pillars, you see that the leading organizations, not only here, but also with the banks and insurance companies, will perform really strongly across all 4 pillars. It is a organizational wide effort, as we know. We're going to get into that in a minute. But really pushing all of these aspects at once is what really characterizes the leading organizations. And this has been something obviously on the radar of the leading organizations for a long time. So sort of starting this process years ago. So there's a lot of thinking that lies behind this that is not new. Obviously, the technology is moving so quickly. The technology is we talk about that there's an adoption lag. The technologies and the models that are out today are being experimented with, but really getting them in and diffused across the organization are models that are maybe a year old or 18 months old or 2 years old. So those that are best equipped to harness the new models are the ones that have the best setup for that. And that's what we see as sort of the results of this is that, requires that you've got all of this in place at once and that it's a company-wide effort. But I mean, maybe one of the things, Colin, that did surprise me that maybe just to touch on is that compared to the banks, we've seen a little less, external discussion from the payment platforms on use cases with an ROI associated with it. So less specific conversations around where exactly is that ROI. We know that ROI is nascent. We're starting to see realized returns coming in, mainly on the sort of internal processes, starting to see this going in parallel to internal, but also on the front end and the sort of in the growth areas. So we're seeing that starting to be recognized internally. We see the banks being really clear about where that ROI is coming through, and maybe on the payment platforms not yet. But I know we're going to ask all of our panelists to comment on that later on, and whether there might be in the next year ahead and next year or 2 years ahead, a sort of being more vocal on where they're seeing this ROI coming through. Back to you, Colin.
Excellent. So we're getting the slides back on the screen shortly and trying to share those directs. The one of the things that I wanted to look at was not just the ranking in terms of the N count from 1 to 12, but basically look at some of the individual scoring kind of distribution. And obviously we have like clusters of how different banks are basically or different payment companies are performing relative to one another. And Zach, I wanted to bring you into the conversation early because you have the luxury of not being represented directly in this version of the ranking, which is laser focused on the payment networks and the payment processors. So representing JP Morgan Payments, I wanted to get your thoughts on the wider ecosystem of issuing banks, acquiring banks, ISPs, everybody else that kind of makes up the wider ecosystem. You're often described as a competitor in this space. You obviously support all of the open banking protocols, but you're also building your own proprietary stack, your own proprietary rails. When you look at AI maturity in this space, what do you look at when you're choosing kind of where to partner and where to compete?
I mean, I think it's one of the great and fun strategic parts about the payment space is almost everybody in here and on the call is a competitor and a friend and a partner in one way or another. And it just makes the space really interesting. And then we all have, small fintechs trying to take pieces of our business at the same time. So the dynamics of the space are really big. I'd say JP Morgan has a pretty luxurious spot in that we're obviously connected to a bank. We're a big issuer. We're a card company. We're also a merchant acquiring company and probably the largest treasury services supplier in the world. And as a result, we have a lot of capability to bring pieces together depending on what solution we're building. And we tend to bring those together for customers. So I'd say the innovation and the partnership is usually done with a customer in mind and a solution in mind. And we start from there and then build out. And that's really the way that we go about it. And then we're very willing to partner and develop independently, as you were mentioning, and so that we have multiple shots going on at the same time. Again, it's not always clear what's going to work out, and in the end, the customers and the clients decide. And so we want to make sure that we are in the conversation, no matter which solution ends up winning.
Fantastic. So before we get into the areas of performance, one of the things that we like to look at is, in the wider context, what is the evident AI index driving towards? What does it matter? And so we always look at both the inputs, but also the outputs or outcomes in terms of use case production. And when we looked at nearly 100 use cases that the payment companies had documented over the course of the last 2 years, we noticed that they weren't randomly or evenly distributed, but they were clustered with those that were in the top half and the top quartile of the index ranking, especially with Visa, MasterCard, and PayPal. So, Greg, I wanted to bring you in here as one of those dots in the desirable upper right-hand quadrant that demonstrates that as you go up in the index ranking, you have more and more use cases. Can you talk a little bit at an enterprise level about what are the prerequisites for a very effective use case factory, and what are some best practices when you go from development and experimentation to hardcore production and deployment?
Yeah, thank you, and use the term use case factory. So, which is, I let me define that a little bit. I don't think that's one central team building everything. Certainly, it's not at MasterCard, but more of an operating system, a rhythm, a way to translate business imperatives and problems into production AI in a repeatable, safe, secure, and scalable way. And there's kind of a handful of ways that we think about it. It starts with our operating model. We have a very explicitly sort of a hub and spoke model. So the hub is centralizing the elements that we think belong in a central hub: the strategy, the priorities, the governance, the adhering to standards, and shared platforms and reusable assets. And then the spokes are the business units. They're closest to the customer, they're closest to operational issues, and they, for the most part, own execution, value realization. And that's something that we've developed over time. What we've done in the last few years is sort of expand out the hub a little bit, given the need for some of these repeatable assets. The second piece to this is we do have a single front door for all the use cases. I think it's important to have sort of a standardized intake and prioritization mechanism, understanding the business problem to be solved, the data readiness, what value we expect for this, who owns this. That allows us, when we didn't have that in the beginning, we had a lot of duplication. We had people solving the same problem in multiple places. And while, again, it isn't to suggest that the hub is therefore this is what we're going to do, we're prioritizing these, and that's what will be built and nothing else. It is trying to say, hey, what are the common needs for the organization, and how do we organize the organization so we're not doing things in multiple different spots? The third piece of this is the sort of shared data and AI platforms. I think everybody has seen you can't scale these use cases without a strong data foundation. And so from sort of enterprise data platforms that we're building in the center to the ability to access high quality data in a secure and common way, and the tooling that we expand across the teams, this reduces the friction so people can focus on building value as opposed to underlying infrastructure. And I'd say while clean, categorized, aggregated, anonymized transaction data has been the heart of MasterCard services for years, this is still one of the biggest investments we make to allow us to bring additional data sets together, to have the right control plane, the right access controls, so we're able to use things in a consented and appropriate way and enable the organization scale. And then two more I'll hit. One is treating AI like a production capability, not an experiment, is critical. And then finally, enabling the organization. I think you need to maintain some central control over things, but you also need to enable the organization to come up with ideas, because the domain teams understand what's possible. We need everybody to engage with AI, and the enablement and the training to enable the organization to do this are critical to do this at scale.
Excellent. And Ryan, I wanted to bring you into this same conversation. And here's the same data cut a different way, where you see that, on the top bar, about 50% or more of the use cases come from the top 3 ranked entities. And, about 80% come from the top half of the index. PayPal is a significant contributor there. I think you actually make up about a quarter of those 98 use cases that we reviewed. And not just a proportionate number of them have reported impact metrics. Can you follow up on Greg's comment and talk a little bit about where you're seeing use cases generating the most ROI? I know in your investor presentations, you've talked a lot about developer augmentation, or alternatively, looking forward, what do you think has untapped potential in the next couple of years?
Yeah, thanks, Colin. So let me first talk about the use cases, and I think just framing sort of PayPal, maybe for those who aren't as familiar, but like PayPal owns a lot of end-to-end platforms spanning consumer wallets, merchant services, credit, fraud, identity risk, really in checkout, right? And so I think because we have such a diverse portfolio, that naturally generates a lot more AI use cases across a lot more domains. And so we do see a lot of different areas, and similar to sort of like what Greg was saying, we do have, a central team of scientists that do focus on AI, but we've really pushed hard to democratize that across these different units and domains in particular. So to your earlier point, Colin, around like where we've seen the ROI, yes, we have seen a good amount of and rapid development in AI assisted sort of development. What's sort of interesting is how like the specific areas that we're seeing in what would be the traditional SDLC or software development lifecycle. It started a lot in the test area of generating sort of test cases, but then where you start to see some novel innovation is we've had people focusing on even things like using AI to optimize test paths. So for example, if you're changing code and adding a feature, which test paths should you be running? Which ones do you not need to? And so we've seen results saving developers time around 70-80% on test code execution, which is quite meaningful when you think about how many things get run in a production before you hit a production environment. And so people are finding, unique ways to focus on, things that are just taking up time or inefficient. And so while we're saving, 70-80% of test execution, our yield is about 95%, meaning we still find the same types of bugs that we do, and we A/B test that, for example. And so those are sort of examples of like areas that I didn't anticipate, earlier on, but people are finding ways to really optimize, which is exciting. I think if you move up stack, you start to see a lot of opportunities, and we're seeing a lot of great results around the product development lifecycle. So when you start thinking about, because we're a global company, going into other markets, you can get very far, I would say 70-80% of the way there. When you need to enter in a new country, you have to be understanding, what the regulatory and landscape is. You do a search, kind of write a PRD, and you have a kernel of something that you can start with. So we're seeing a lot of, all the way from PDLC to SDLC, just holistically across the development sort of process. And then, an area that we have been for many, many years focusing on fraud and risk with AI. We've been building a lot of these models for many, many years, but I think with the advances all the way down from silicon all the way up to like inferences, we're running basically 800, almost a trillion inferences a day, and continuously tuning our fraud models as well. So those have been, really great, ROIs, I would say. Some of them are surprising, some of those just acceleration in areas that I had not anticipated. And then I think untapped potential, I would look at sort of two areas. One area that I'm heavily focused on is agentic commerce. I think, there's a lot that's going on in this space with some of the big players like Google and OpenAI, and we've been working very closely with them. We're focusing on a solution called StoreSync, which effectively, because we've got a large small merchant base, is syndicating their product catalogs, handling payments, as well as dropping orders into the order management system, all single-handedly. And so if you look at the early days of what like Perplexity was doing with agentic commerce, like that gives you a window of what's sort of to come, I think, in many ways. But then you look in the areas of what OpenAI and their approach to this is changing slightly as well. And so, what we're trying to do is really make sure that on the merchant side, we can accommodate all these new protocols coming out, and really make it as easy as possible, because it is changing so quickly. But like it's inevitable at some point that these are going to get a lot more streamlined as trust becomes more ubiquitous, I would say. These protocols start to flush out, and some of the winners will become more evident. And the last one I would say around untapped potential is, I think, again, back on the merchant side of things, especially small merchants, we call them solopreneurs. I think from an agent specific standpoint, really helping small business owners and solopreneurs really get their business started. Conversationally, a lot of these small solopreneurs do a lot of communication in business using, iMessage or, just texting in general. And so it's I think a great opportunity to really help them organize and focus on really growing their business from day one. So excited for both of those. Obviously, PayPal is focused on these areas as well, but definitely exciting time.
Yeah. And Zach, I saw you nodding along to some of Ryan's comments, and I didn't know if that you were sympathizing or being supportive. So I wanted to bring you into the conversation on the ROI question. Is that of these, nearly 100 use cases, about a third of them report impact metrics. But when we look at how this compares across banking and payments and insurance, these are very different configurations about what types of metrics people are reporting. So in banking, we see a lot more focused on efficiency gains and productivity gains. And actually, we're getting a lot of questions from the audience right now about how essential technologies that are part of the larger platforms and hubs, how that generates benefits across like the wider enterprise rather than just a point solution or application. And you can see on this chart, we in the payment space, we have a lot more focus on risk reduction. So my question for you is, can you talk a little bit about that different cut that we see as somebody who straddles both sides of the fence in bankings and payments? Is getting ROI out of AI within the payment space fundamentally different? Do you need to be sitting on the rails? Do you need to be sitting on the network intelligence layer to really take advantage of those economies of scale that are very specific to this industry?
Well, I mean, I think there's a couple of different ways to think about it. So let's be honest, there is also a ton of use cases in the operations space. All of us have big operations teams and customers of various sizes calling us in and dealing with payments that are broken or an issue, or helping to educate a customer on why their auth is down or up, or why we've stopped a payment for fraud or KYC or whatever reason. So, I mean, I think there is, in all these cases, I'm sure everybody here is doing a bunch of work, and so is JP Morgan on the operations side, just as the banks are on their operations and call center work. I think, and especially but I think what's unique about the payment space is the fraud angle. We're all responsible for fraud across all these rails. At JP Morgan, we're transmitting about, or covering about 12 trillion payments, or 12 trillion in payments a day. And so that's a huge amount of fraud space that we're trying to deal with. And as a result, of course, all the fraud use cases get great ROI there. And so I think the risk reduction and the value out of those, both for our customers and our clients in the corporate space and our retail bank customers, is quite important for us. I also think, I mean, one of the reasons why I came to this space as opposed to others is, just as Ryan was saying, I think agentic commerce and the creation of totally new products in the space is quite interesting. In most of the other banking spaces, we're not seeing quite the innovation on new product development. And in payments, we're all working on new product development, whether that's agentic treasury or in the agentic commerce B2C or in B2B. And so there's just a really set of interesting use cases around that's I think we're all betting on and investing
in. And Greg, I just want to pause on the ROI element for one more beat. And obviously what's on the slide is just looking at the individual use cases. But one of the interesting findings that we published was that when we look at the 12 payment companies, there hasn't been one yet that's reporting realized or projected ROI across all AI activities. Whereas in banking, that's about 1 in 5 institutions. And when we were chatting about this beforehand, you had an interesting hot take on why that is the case. Can you walk us through that?
Yeah, I'd say there are a couple of things. One is, I think for individual initiatives and what we're doing, and I'm sure this is the same for Zachary and the same for Ryan, like, you want to understand what are the metrics of success for any initiative, AI or otherwise, and track those to manage the business as effectively as possible. So we're tracking indicators like usage levels, productivity enhancement, at times cost benefits, a lot of revenue drivers, how many of our products are using AI, what is the growth rate of those products relative to others. But mostly what we're focused on are the measures of customer value. Right. So here, what you see on the screen is, how much fraud are we able to basically capture without increasing false positives or friction in the ecosystem? i.e., is the model capturing more of what we're trying to stop? And are we providing a better experience to the consumer and to the banks that are our customers in this instance? We're looking at how much more quickly we can ship product, how much more accurate our solutions can be. And all those things matter for all of the initiatives. I think when it comes to the overall question that you posed, Colin, I think it's important to recognize payments, and like MasterCard, we're a network business, and we think of sort of a virtuous loop of innovation and scale. So our services, fraud, marketing services, insights products, analytics, are now close to 40% of our business, and they help differentiate our payment solutions. As we grow those services, that differentiates our payments business, that helps that business grow. As that business grows, it creates more data. More data improves our models, our services, the customer value. which begets a stronger network, begets more volume, begets more data in this sort of virtuous loop. And what we're focused on is sort of holistically, how are we able to provide more value to our customers? How do we make the ecosystem smarter? How do we make the ecosystem safer? How do we make the ecosystem more personal in a way that's consented? And when we do that, we're trying to lift the entirety of the company. And we think of ROI as the scale, the durability, the competitive advantage that we can bring holistically across these solutions, across services, across payments, across commercial and consumer. And so that's how we think about the return from these things is holistically, how is that helping us grow? How is that helping us improve our efficacy and our efficiency as an organization, as opposed to thinking of like AI as an ends. It's a means to enabling all of this to go more quickly. And that's why I think when we talk about it, we talk about the customer value of the specific use cases that we're delivering, as opposed to like the overall ROI of AI for the firm, because it's like electricity. It's inherent in what we're doing and so much of it. And we're thinking about it as how does it make our company grow faster and more productively?
Excellent. I think we'll come back to the ROI theme a little bit more in the context of some of the performance stats. So I kind of wanted to switch there and get a little bit kind of one cut further down. And what's on the screen right now is basically the performance profile of the index leader, Visa. And just to walk people through what they're looking at, basically what we've done here with the scores is that across each of the 10 sub-pillars in clockwise order, inclusive of talent, innovation, leadership, and transparency, what we've done is percent ranked each of the scores against that index average or that anchor point. So the further you are, the further the blue line is to the periphery of the circle, and the larger your polygon kind of becomes, the higher in the index you appear. And it's a good way for us to look at or identify strengths and opportunities areas. Alexandra, you spend a lot of time in meetings kind of getting into the nitty gritty and getting into the weeds of all of the data points behind this kind of top level summary. Can you walk our audience through a little bit how the payments companies and our wider customer sets are using this data, what they're gaining from it? What are kind of the top questions that you're seeing in the space before we go into the performance profiles of some of the other leaders?
Yeah, no, thank you, Colin, for that. I mean, so as most of you would know, we've been ranking financial services. We're starting with the banks for now over 3 years, right? And so what we find sort of common both for the banks and I think also for the payment platforms, although it's just been released, is to give some sense of and again should say this is an outside-in measurement, so we should remember that this is resting on publicly available data. The methodology is constructed in a way that, we're looking for what we know to be the proxies of performance, but it's an investment into these enablers that have a strong correlation to outcomes. So what we see that this gets used for is looking at, what are the strength of the capability that I have as an organization that is leading to and solving the questions and the problems that are in front of me right now. What are the best practices? So getting, as to your point, Colin, getting really into the nitty gritty and the weeds of everything, looking at the actual use cases that are going through to production, even while banks have very different profiles, as do payment platforms as well. There are lots of common use case problems or clusters of problems and the technology that is being deployed. So we're sort of trying to create a way in which that we can see sort of how is that moving, what pace, and where do you sit on that journey? Where do you sit as a distance to the leader? Where do you sit in terms of the impact you're getting? Where do you sit in terms of the efficacy of the investment going into AI deployment? And then questions, and the many great questions raised in the chat about the balance of build versus buy, what kind of partnerships and technology partnerships and investments are you making that is supporting that acceleration? And now as we're going into this sort of different phase of AI deployment, sort of what are the key questions that come out of that? And then the third thing I would say is that what are the KPIs to track? So whether it is specific use case deployment in a particular area, How is that going? But also general purpose tools that are being rolled out. So what are the KPIs that to track in terms of utilization, diffusion, usage, hours saved, and sort of what is it? What are super users doing? How do you get the rest of the organization to get it in the hands of everyone so you can look at getting that productivity up? And then the question is, what do you do with those productivity gains? We're going to talk about that later on sort of in the context of talent. But sort of that is how we see, most of the cohorts in the banks and also payment platforms and insurers are using the index is for those three things.
So I think what's interesting is that each of these performance profiles is obviously unique, and there are kind of multiple paths to get to the same scoring range or position of prominence in the ranking. Greg, when we look at MasterCards, it's distinct because you are the number one kind of unchallenged company with regards to the leadership pillar and the transparency pillar. And to remind the audience, that's where we find a very comprehensively documented strategy that's specific to AI. It's where we see the concentrations of the use case factory that we talked about previously, and it's where we see the governance element of all of this. These things are hard and take years and a lot of deliberate incremental effort to establish. Can you talk a little bit about how that sunk cost enables MasterCard to move faster on all the stuff that Alexandra just alluded to? And also a little bit of that balancing act. That's another question that follows from your previous comments on ROI. And we're getting this from the audience, is how do you balance kind of that elements of transparency in the context of fraud with partners like your verifiable intent program with Google? Like, it's a delicate balancing act between what you said before and like what your strengths are from this outside in perspective.
Yeah. In every way, try to make it an and statement as opposed to an or statement when it comes to the responsibility and the innovation piece. So look, overall, we're pleased to be in the top three of all the categories, but we're thrilled for this number one spot in leadership and transparency. And I do think that reflects a long-standing foundation that MasterCard has built around governance, around applying it in real-world use cases, and to just sort of a fundamental commitment to inclusive, secure, and innovative technology. I remember, when a couple years after I joined the company, detailed discussions around how we embed governance, how we embed our responsibility principles. So they're not just sort of words on a page, but they're embedded into how we're building our technology. And I think, the reason any success we have here is due to years and years of focus on this. But I do think when we look forward, trust is what's going to set leadership apart. And it's one of the reasons why we spend a lot of time on this. And to enable trust, you need governance and you need transparency. That's critical to our brand. It's critical to our employees, the business we support, and ultimately consumers. And I do think people need to trust the outputs and the efficacy of AI to use it. And we're not going to lead to adoption without trust. I'll come back to the verifiable intent point you had on that, because I think that's key to that. But as I just think about all of these components, it does start with clarity of strategy. We've tried to be deliberate about where AI matters the most to us, how it matters to make our employees stronger, but also where it matters around protecting the network to make it safer and more secure, how it enables commerce to be more intelligent and smart, how it helps our customers deliver personalized experiences with consent and care to their customers, ultimately helping customers grow. And I think when people get clear on the why we're doing this, they spend less time debating direction and more time delivering outcomes. So that's how I think it's enabling speed. Governance is a second accelerator. And when I came into this role, I was a little concerned about it. We have such a focus on governance that I was worried that it was going to be brakes on the degree of innovation. I didn't know how we would balance that. And again, I think when it becomes fundamental to who you are and how you're delivering this, that strong enterprise-wide guardrails allow you to actually move more quickly. They can enable, not slow teams down. And having clear standard means you don't have to relitigate things every time, but you have an AI governance framework that's embedded in the life cycle. You have a risk-based approach, so you're thoughtful on the use case and how much you need to focus on it. You have standardized tooling as opposed to bespoke outcomes, and clear ownership about how this is going to be done. And with that strategy, governance, and ultimately transparency to create alignment, I think it's ultimately an accelerator to how this is coming forward. So you mentioned verifiable intent. I saw there was something in the chat on that. That's a way to create a standard to enable information to be passed securely. So like we're only seeing the information that is necessary to approve a transaction. But in the case of a dispute, we have access to information to ensure that we can help the ecosystem operate in the same trusted and transparent way that it's operating today. But we need to create a way to capture the intent of the consumer, pass that through the ecosystem while maintaining sort of what we call selective disclosure, what is called selective disclosure. So we're only seeing the pieces that are relevant in that transaction. And again, I think coming up with these standards that everybody can get aligned behind to enable the ecosystem to move quickly, to protect information, and to protect consumers is how we're going to move quickly, and we're going to move at scale.
Excellent. And I think we'll come back to those points in the context of agentic commerce towards as we enter the back half of the conversation today. But Ryan wanted to also talk about talent as an enabler, because when we look at PayPal's performance profile, you see this big spike at 12 o'clock in talent capability. And what's interesting that we wrote about in the report with regards to PayPal is how dense your AI-specific talent stack is. And we're pretty precise on what we mean by this. We're talking about AI development talent and data engineers and AI-specific software implementation and AI-specific product managers. And when we look at PayPal's share of all employees across those 12 companies, you only make up about 7% of total headcount. But with regards to the AI-specific employees, you make up nearly 20% of the talent that we're ingesting into the index. So pulling back and maybe speaking at the industry at large, can you talk a little bit about how you see the talent stack evolving, generally speaking, from this point forward? And what's easy talent to find? What's hard talent to find? What are you needing more or less of when you look at your technical priorities, not yesterday or today, but in the next kind of 18 to 24 month period?
Yeah, which seems like forever from now, right? So, but I'll do my best to be forward looking. So I think to your point about the density, this goes back a little bit about what we were talking about in the last section around the way we, our sort of diverse set of our portfolios. Like, we made a conscious decision sort of early on that we couldn't just have one team that specializes it. We needed to push all of this out and democratize it across the different domains. And we set sort of a high bar for that as we were kind of rolling these out in early days. And so where we see things sort of evolving, I think, is, again, AI is more for a multiplier for engineers and the teams versus, in a particular silo. So, the thing we talk about internally a lot is just imagine sort of like Iron Man when, he puts on his suit. That's kind of what we imagine every developer and product person to kind of have that sort of AI assisted focus on development across all of these different teams. And in order for that to happen, it's really, I think, important to really build a strong community because this is evolving quickly. We're learning. We're going to get some bumps and bruises along the way as well. But it's important, if we have that community, it's easier to kind of scale across sort of across the board. But I think the next phase of engineers are people who build, orchestrate, and really know how to supervise AI agents. So it is a fundamentally different skill. We see it now when you start thinking about. I think the people have a tendency to sort of if you get really into it and you have enough knowledge, you tend to over engineer, trying to get so many different agents to do everything. It's not really easy to do that. You have to really be aware of like memory systems and how you can fine tune certain agents, or even build RAG pipelines and give them all the context that they need. And so you have to have people that are attuned to how to orchestrate and get these things set up almost sort of like natively. And some of the frameworks are evolving to make it easier and easier. Like we start to see, Claude Cowork, for example, are good examples where some more foundational work is sort of happening in there to reach more people. But that's a skill set that if you can fine tune, you get a lot of rewards out of it for sure. And so I think that's sort of the next set of skill sets that people will have in this space. And then the next is, I think, really a focus on pushing the boundaries. If you really take a step back and think about where we are, it is such early days. And I think most people will say that there is so much opportunity to innovate. So if you're a company that's just like, great, I want to learn how to use all of these tools, maybe you're going to outpace your competitors who aren't as aggressive in there. But if you really are focusing on innovation, again, all through the entire AI stack, you can kind of pick your areas that you want. You don't need to use general purpose models. Like, they will serve a good starting point. But you can build your own foundational models, and that's not an easy thing to do. Or build your own smaller language models, fit for purpose type of thing. But there's a lot of areas for innovation in there, and really not being afraid and being, pushing the boundaries of what's possible when you get going. And I think it's when, for all teams that are delivering value and products to their customers, being very responsible about doing that. But I think really pushing the boundaries on there, I think you're going to really be able to deliver outsized value compared to your competitors. It's not just speed, but actually how you deliver it. Because all these things, whether it's how accurate and how fast you can deliver these results, are really, really important. So it's great. I think somebody was mentioning it. You got to have data. And if you have data, that's a differentiation. But how do you deliver that to your customers as quickly and as accurately as you can? And is really key.
Excellent. So in the last 10 minutes, I want to just do a very quick lightning round and kind of anchor that in evidence view of the world. And we've talked a lot about impact and ROI. We've obviously talked about the use cases. And through the performance profiles, we've opened the door to the enablers or the inputs. And Alexander, I wanted you to tee this up based on the back of Ryan's comments, because he said we're still in the early innings. But one of the things we observe is that the companies at the top of the index, again, aren't there by accident. They've been investing in this for years, if not decades. So, but looking forward, not looking back, what are the things that are keeping folks up at night from your perspective? Is it the talent? Is it the governance? Is it the platforms? Is it all of the above with regards to the laundry list of issues that's emerged from this discussion?
The laundry list is long, Colin. Where do we start? I think I was talking to someone the other day. It was just like, there's like, these are 100 things that you got a checklist that you got to do. I mean, to Greg and to Ryan and Zach have mentioned so many already, but sort of what we're seeing to be, where their sort of the pain points are, right? It is on the platform, on the architecture, right? And so being able to, as models are shifting, changing, we then have Anthropic, then we've got a great model out from OpenAI, then there's one from Google. So having sort of the ability to interchange with the models, having the architecture that's right for the agents, to Ryan's point, like to be able to centralize what is relevant to centralize, and for the reusability of use cases or patterns of use cases, right? So you're not going down and reinventing the wheel all over again, right? So start from scratch. I think, Greg, you pointed to that in the beginning in your first remarks, right? Sort of no duplication. So trying to figure out that hub and spoke and what needs to be centralized and what do you need to leave to the businesses. Another thing that we're seeing much more of is that, shifting things down. And Zach, that's something we wrote about for JP Morgan a couple of weeks ago, and some changes in the organizational structure, but with that focus of putting the two in the box. So you've got your head of, your business lead and your expert, right, to really figure out how are we going to solve these problems? How are we going to get this workflow change in place? How are we going to re-engineer this? Are we going to think about it as a digital twin? So you've got these 32 steps, you step aside, you think about, some people call it Shark Tanking, you think about how do we reimagine this workflow and how do we then put it back in when we figured it out? So those are the things, and I think to Ryan's point earlier, how do you get the time to actually sit and figure this out? And how do you avoid just slapping AI on something that you're doing and you just get a 10% increase, in productivity, where you actually could get much, much more if you rethought the workflow and sort of systems rethink. And so the war on talent is always going on, and all of the work families that we are looking at that are pushing that forward are important, but also people can really think about systems change and so on. Governance is another one, really difficult to, when things are so fragmented and a lot of people are feeding into that governance journey, so that can slow down getting use cases into production. So that's another one that keeps people up at night. Would love to hear everyone on the panel talk about that. And then also just on getting these utilization rates up, right? It's hand-to-hand combat in many cases, where you have to sit down next to someone and say, no, this is like so good for how you can work more efficiently. I don't have time to do this. Now, hang on a second, look at this. And then they're like, oh my goodness, this is amazing. Now, how do you do that at scale for many, many thousands of people? So I think that's also what we see keeping people up at night.
Cool. Let's talk about 3 enablers in rapid succession. And I want to kind of start with applied research in the innovation ecosystem. And Zach, go to you, because what we found in payments is that 90% of the 400 plus research papers that are specific to payments tech or AI enhancement of payment tech rest with the top 3 ranked entities. But this is also a huge core competency of JP Morgan that we observe in the banking index. And I saw that you recently boosted a paper from a couple of years ago on your LinkedIn feed. Can you talk a little bit about how applied research keeps you ahead of disruptive trends and how the nature of research is changing as we move from kind of testing the frontier to the practicality of rolling out these platform tools and getting ROI out of them?
I mean, I think it's amazing to be at a place with such a deep research bench that JP Morgan has. And I think it just enables us to skate a little bit to where the puck is going to be more, because there's a set of research people that have the time to be working on questions that, frankly, you're not working on when you're chasing to put something live every day. And that gives you an opportunity for them, in the case with the large payments model and the fraud paper that we did, or that you're referencing, they worked on that quite early on. And it took a little while for us to get it into production and start to use it. But I think the research team was out there early solving problems and thinking about it. And that's been my experience both at NatWest before coming here, but here also. You need those research teams out in front with a little more time, a little more mind space, and a different set of networks of what they're reading and what they're thinking about. Because when you get down to fighting fraud day to day, for example, it's a real fight that you're doing in a really fast way, and that people just don't have time to think kind of a big picture for what a new solution is. But I think the other thing that, in terms of the innovation side, is that it also means that you can pull people that are learning new skills. So I think Ryan said it right. Like, how long have people been thinking about memory architectures and agentic systems? Not very long. But if you've had some people thinking about it for a particular use case, like building an email or a meeting sorting question or something like that, or a routing question, then they've already thought through some of those things, and you can quickly apply them when the use case demands it, or when you start to develop something. And that's quite an interesting capability, and it's something I'm already seeing. We're on agentic commerce. We have deep researchers in agentic planning, in optimization, in market-based solutions from our markets business, like clearing mechanisms that all apply really well to agentic commerce. And we're able to leverage them and pull them into the specific projects that we're working on. And those cross learnings are really powerful.
And you teed us up greatly to kind of close out with agentic commerce. And Greg, one of the things that MasterCard's great at is in the leadership pillar, publicly communicating what they're doing with regards to AI strategy, with regards to recruiting, with regards to research, with regards to partnerships. And that's actually somewhat rare here than it is in banking, where here about only a quarter of people have this dedicated external communications hub. How important is that when we get into what you anticipate might be the learning curve or socializing agentic commerce across different demographics or cohorts that are a little wary of it in terms of the trust factor?
Yeah, I think it builds on where I ended my last comment around trust. I think this space is moving so quickly and people have so many questions that there's a real benefit of being clear and transparent about what we're doing, what we're thinking, the use cases we're looking at, how we're thinking about governance, how we're thinking about safeguards. And in agentic commerce, I think it matters even more than usual because it is a new way of people interacting and people have a lot of questions around it. And it's evolving very quickly as mentioned earlier on this chat, like OpenAI is thinking differently today than they were a week ago about how they were enabling certain elements of this. And next week's going to be a little bit different than this week. So I think there's an imperative of responsibility, but also a benefit of staying up to date of what we're thinking, what we're doing, because I think that understanding is very, very critical. And that's going to enable safe, seamless, and trusted commerce. And I think about it, we're talking externally here about what we're putting out there, but the same goes internally, where we are trying to publish more and more information about how we're thinking about new techniques, how what we're doing enables our services in different ways. There was a question earlier in the chat about how is AI now making fraud models different? I mean, fraud models have been machine learning based for decades. Like, what's new now? And there are a variety of ways at which we're using additional data in Gen AI to make these models different. In one way, think of it as adding other variables to the model to add to the predictive power by mapping merchants that we couldn't map before with the latency and the speed necessary. But also, how do we think about brand new ways about sort of transformer models built on transaction tabular data as opposed to language that enables us to predict transactions in a new way and fundamentally change this. And keeping our executive leadership team and the company up to speed about how this is working, try to explain what's happening, I think is important. So both internally and externally, I think this transparency is sort of critical, particularly in a fast-moving space like this.
Excellent. And Ryan, last word to you. Picking up where Greg left up on responsibility, only about 1 in 4 payments companies publicly document their responsible AI principles, and only 2, including PayPal, are actually providing examples of the implementation of that. Again, how does this help you move faster, or where does it prove onerous when you're looking at all of the partners that have to live up to the standard that you're setting?
Yeah, I mean, we really look at responsible AI as a moat in agentic commerce. I think just to double down on Greg's point, couldn't agree more. Like, when you've got agents spending money on behalf of a consumer, like just trust is not optional, right? It has to sort of be there. It is table stakes. And so I think, we do feel like the foundational things that we have built over the last 25 years, it's crazy it's been that long, between things like buyer protection, dispute resolution, and having a two-sided network that you can KYC and KYB, it sort of just, we can extend that infrastructure, quite naturally to autonomous systems. And so I think on the consumer side, that's a big step for us and something that we lean very heavily on. And then on the partnership point, that when we're trying to be very transparent, and that has paid off really well for us, because then when we start talking with these companies like OpenAI and Google, and We don't start at like first principles, of like, hey, how are you handling X, Y, and Z, right? Like the conversation just goes directly to onboarding. Like and we have it's sort of bi-directional in that case with some of these companies as well. And that's a huge real speed advantage for us in what I would downplay as a fast moving market, right? I mean, it is like at warp speed here. And so, I think the hard problem in this space really isn't about the traditional payments plumbing. It is a lot of it just sort of goes back to like liability if something doesn't go right or doesn't go wrong. So, when you think about existing chargeback frameworks, a lot of them are assuming human initiated transactions, but I think the more that we focus on, how what we're focusing on is how we're uniquely positioned to define what that means in an agent initiated world for dispute resolution, those types of things. Those are the types of problems that we're looking to solve and partner with to build unique sort of experiences for consumers and the agents that are powering them. So
excellent. Well, unfortunately, gentlemen, we are out of time. We covered a lot of ground today. I'm sure we could talk for several more hours, but just in terms of concluding comments, wanted to tell the audience that the report is available now for download. Obviously, reach out to us if you want to learn more about Evident and our membership proposition specifically. And most importantly, gentlemen, thank you for your time and thoughts and attention today. And thank you to the audience for giving up an hour of their busy day and all the excellent questions that they put through chat. Way too many to cover in such a short space of time, but thanks everybody.